Happens a lot. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our midweek service. It is so good to have you. Cindy and I were going for a walk. We've reached that age. I used to make fun of old guys in the gym as they were trying to work out, and I was a young, strapping young man, and now I've become that old guy in the gym that I would have made fun of 30 years ago. Cindy and I now go for walks for exercise, and I consider that a workout. We were walking through our neighborhood just within the last 24 hours, and I made the observation that the lakes or the ponds in our neighborhood were down, and we must be in a drought. Well, apparently the Lord heard that prayer and didn't understand the intended response to it. It wasn't in a deluge. I was out making some hospital visits just a little while ago, and I was escorting a lady out of McBride Hospital with my umbrella, trying to be a gentleman as she was getting ready to have a knee replacement. I was trying to give her some counsel as I've been through that myself. And literally, by the time I dropped her off at her car, my umbrella was inside out. And then I was trying to get gas at Sam's on the way here. I was safely underneath the cover, which did no good because the rain was blowing sideways. Honestly, I was afraid we weren't going to have church tonight. It was that bad just an hour ago. You all are a hardy lot. Congratulations for being too tough to stay away from church when it rains. So I'm glad to have you here. You are in for a special treat tonight. Of course, we have barely gotten into our study of the book of Revelation. I think I am just on our fourth lesson, and we will pick that up next week. But this is too good a friend and too good a resource to not have when he's in town. This gentleman that you're about to hear was an Idaho representative for the state legislature and came to a notoriety among conservative movements. Of course, he's a solid believer, homeschool dads, here with his family. As they're traveling in this area, but did the research when he discovered some things just didn't make sense as he was in government, and did a deep dive into communism and the tentacles that it has in our country. And they, on a wing and a prayer, did a documentary in 2010 called Agenda. And that wound up being an award-winning documentary. As a matter of fact, they got a $100,000 prize for that documentary back when $100,000 was worth about $40,000. Now $100,000 is worth about $10,000 thanks to the current administration. But they came out with a sequel to it called Agenda 2. And I think so highly of Curtis Bowers that we talk several times a year, and whenever I have a question about what's going on, for example, in Ukraine, or what's going on as far as the communist agenda, I will call Chris Ann Hall, I will call Trevor Loudon, and I will call Curtis Bowers. You are in for a treat tonight. Curtis is going to speak, and then we're going to take a few minutes and do some Q&A at the end, and then we'll be dismissed on time. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to our pulpit this evening, Mr. Curtis Bowers.
Thank you so much. Thank you for weathering the storm and coming. I know it's tough sometimes when it's so stormy out to wonder if you should go or not, but thank you for being here. I know it's not an accident that you're here, and so I hope that I can be a blessing to you. A couple Bible verses I just want to go through quickly that fit into what I'm going to be talking about. In Ephesians 6, as I know your pastor has talked about 1,000,000 times, because he understands the battle we are in, it tells us very clearly, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. And then it says this, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. It is a spiritual battle that we are in. And because it was a spiritual battle and not a physical battle, most of our side has been dead asleep for decades because they thought, oh, everything's fine. It's America. It'll always be fine. We don't need to worry about being involved. Our kids, the schools are giving our kids a good education. The little leagues are teaching our kids sports. We can just go play golf and relax. and it's all going to be fine. Well, we've awakened to see, no, it's when you don't do the things God's asked you to do, it doesn't turn out all right. It never does. One other key verse that fits into my topic for tonight, John 9:44. And this is key, because once you realize it's a spiritual battle, we know who our commander-in-chief is, but we also need to know who their commander-in-chief is. Because if they're following him, they're going to be playing by his playbook, not ours. And here's about their father. Ye are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. On the other side, there is no truth, because their father is a liar. And then it says, when he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. He has had his disciples on earth since the beginning, just like Jesus has. And I think in America, we were spared so much of that because we had such a Christian foundation and such a Christian tradition that the average lost man even lived his life kind of according to the code of the Christian faith, at least in public. He might have done bad things, but he was ashamed of them, so he'd go back in the dark alley around the corner to watch the filthy movies or to do whatever, because he knew, no, this is not good, but I'm going to do it anyway. But he knew, I will not be accepted in the culture if I let people know how vile I am. When I was growing up, it's changed so much that just profanity. I'll tell you a quick story that kind of sets the stage for the changes that have taken place. I was probably 7 or 8 years old, so it was 72 or 73. I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and my mom had to go to the store to get some ladies' things, and so she took me with her and made me wait out on the sidewalk. I mean, so one part of this that shows how much we've changed. Back then, a young man was not allowed in a woman's department. I mean, they would not have allowed you in there and say, you need to leave. You cannot come into a ladies' clothing section or whatever. You might see something that's inappropriate for you to see. So that's one change. But I was standing out on the sidewalk waiting for her while she shopped. And while I was there, and I'll never forget this because I was very scared, there was a guy on the other side of the doorway. And he was just a rough character, which was uncommon back then. As far as he was tattooed head to toe and just really rough. And back then that was very uncommon. And while he was talking to this other guy, he used the word hell. And a minute or two went by, and I remember when he looked over and he saw me, and he came walking right over to me. He put his face right in my face, and that's why I can still picture what he looked like, because I didn't know what was getting ready to happen. And he said this, "Son, I'm so sorry for saying that. I didn't see you standing there." That's how much we've changed. He knew you don't say the word hell in front of a child or a lady. Even if he talks like that, he knew, no. Our culture has slid so far. We have slid so far. We don't have the standards. We don't have the purity of that we had for centuries before this current age when people started to try to rot us from the inside out. Now, before I get going on this, I always just like to know where people are coming from. How many of you have seen the whole film, Agenda Grinding America Down? Okay? And how many of you have seen the entire film, Agenda 2, Masters of Deceit? Okay. Those of you that haven't, which is most of you, if you have any interest in what I talk about tonight, you should get some copies of that. We made it to be a blessing to you, where instead of spending years of your life trying to research what's going on, you sit down and in 90 minutes, it tells you the whole story better than I could ever say in a talk. But then it gives you a tool to have Joe come over. Hey, Joe, come over. I'll make some popcorn. I want you to watch this film. It gives you a tool to wake others up very easily. When you give them the stack of books, they never read them. When you tell them you ought to do this, they never do it. If you invite them over and have movie night, they'll probably come. And you might be able to awaken them from their slumber because we need them on our side. The battle we're in right now is something called fifth generation warfare. And it's the spiritual realm of things in the battle. But we are closer to collapse than we've ever been. Our culture is just collapsing. Our civilization is collapsing. When you have a civilization that some of the states in America are voting to allow a woman to have an abortion after birth, you're not civilized people anymore. No one would do that. Like a perfectly healthy little child, yeah, kill it, I don't want it. That's a barbaric country. The law is not being upheld. In Los Angeles right now, they do not prosecute rapes. Do you know that? The DA there said, nope, we're not prosecuting that. It has to be a first-degree murder to be prosecuted. I mean, that's a collapse, a total meltdown of civilization. When law and order is not upheld, then you have gone back to the good old days of the Wild West, where every man does what is right in his own eyes, and it doesn't work. It ends in death, just like Proverbs says, there is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the ends thereof are the ways of death. And so our job is very important as we stand for the truth, we speak the truth, and most importantly, we live the truth. So we're different. So they can see Jesus is real just by our life. Because like, you're different. Yeah, it's because of Jesus. And so they cannot deny his existence because we're proof of it because we're so different. Some of the generations of warfare, real quickly, as I get into fifth generation warfare, the first generation of warfare was the old Civil War type. You line up in two columns, raise your muskets and fire. I don't understand that, how that ever made sense to anyone as a good strategy, but that's what they did back then. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. But that was there. And then a second generation warfare is when they added the rifling to the muskets. So all of a sudden you could hit someone way, far away because of the accuracy of the bullet. Also, that's when there was breech-loading weapons and machine guns. So that started to change the way battles were done. You could start to get further apart from each other, and the machine guns could sit up on cliffs or whatever, like at Normandy, and just machine gun down indiscriminately, just taking out people they can't even hardly see. So that changed a lot. Third generation warfare was speed, stealth, and surprise. That's when people started to get smart and realize we need to use tactics of like guerrilla warfare. We need to start slipping up. The Navy SEALs, we're going to swim in and get in behind them and come up behind them where they don't know we're there. So a lot of the element of surprise came about. Then fourth generation was when warfare became much more decentralized, and this is just over our lifetime in the 70s and 80s. And all of a sudden, the boundaries started to be blurred between, war and politics, soldiers and civilians. And a perfect example of that is terrorism. It's all of a sudden, it's like, no, it's not with the government. He's not with the army. It's an individual going and blowing things up and creating terror or whatever. And so it really changed the way things were done. And then fifth generation, what it is about, because of the advances in technology, the internet, computers, and all the advancements, now warfare is taking place, social engineering, disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks, psychological warfare, biological warfare, a lot of different things that we've been living through. And it's basically what it is. It's the deliberate manipulation of an observer's context, of your context, in order to achieve a desired outcome. So it wants you so confused and so uncertain of what's going on, you just do what they say. That you just submit. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, put on my mask. Okay, I better put on my mask. You're not thinking about, well, does that make sense to put on a mask? Does a mask help slow the spread? Does it effective? Or where you start studying, they don't want any studying. They want instant, cheerful obedience. And that's it. Some of the things going through this, so you realize how relevant this is, some of the fifth generation tactics you have been exposed to and attacked under just in the last few years is like masks, like I said. There's no medical data that tells you a mask stops the spread of a virus. And yet we were told, put two on. Yeah. When the holes in a mask are as big as a basketball net to a virus. So it's against that submission. We're having you put that on not to protect you, but just to show we're in control of you. That's why you put the mask on. Social distancing. I mean, they act like they're medicine, or Fauci says he's science. What are you talking about? A virus has a 6-foot leash on it? What are you talking about? The lockdowns. Now, see, as I've studied the other side, the more you study the enemy, like Sun Tzu said, if you know your enemy and you know yourself, you're going to win every battle, because then you understand what's going on. But the more I've studied them over the last 20 years or so, almost just full-time exclusively trying to figure out what they're doing, I realized, wait a minute. You start to see behind the rhetoric and behind the propaganda of what they're really doing. They hate small business in America. They've wrote about that since the 70s. We don't like the idea that an individual can create wealth like that on his own. They hate that. They want you working for big government or big business. That's the end game. They don't want any independent business. John D. Rockefeller 100 years ago said competition is a sin. We must extinguish all of it. So since then, big business has been buying off all our politicians. That's why they don't represent us, because they're the one funding their campaigns. And then as a return favor, then they pass laws that make it hard to compete with them. Oh, you have to have health insurance for all your employees. The big companies don't mind that, because they know that they're not going to pay for it. Who's going to pay for it? You are. They just jack up their products. You penalize Walmart, they just jack up the prices. You pay for every penalty, every regulation, but the little guy can't afford to do that. And so he's out of business. Well, the lockdowns, and we saw the inconsistency of the businesses and the things that were considered essential, and we saw where their priorities were right away. The big box stores that have hundreds of people in at a time, which is, if there was something spreading around, you wouldn't want those open. And the little Ma and Pa hardware that has 2 people in at a time, no, you can't open. And of course, the church. No, that's not essential. And many people went along with that. I'm sure you didn't. Did you?
We closed for 3 weeks.
Okay, yeah, at the beginning. Yeah, because we didn't know what was going on, and to be prudent and wise. But then after that, you realize, okay, this is just a common flu going around or whatever. And by the way, God would care less what it is. He told you to be in the house of God, worshiping Him, and so I have to open the doors, and we have to be inside there. So we went through that, and they eliminated hundreds, just of restaurants. I used to be in the restaurant business for years, had 3 restaurants, and was into that, and then God got a hold of me and said, hey, I want to do something different with your life. But I have a heart for them because I know how hard they work. They work so hard to be successful. And over 300,000 small restaurants in America closed during COVID and never reopened. I know that was their life. That was the blood, sweat, and tears. That was years of building up a reputation as some place worth going, good food, good service, whatever. And so I hate that. But they destroyed that wealth. The shot, that was a 5th generation warfare, giving you something that's safe and effective when it was neither. Yeah. It didn't stop the spread. It didn't stop you from getting it, giving it. And now the data is showing, and it makes your chance of having a more severe reaction to it greater. So it did nothing. But we knew that, even studying the issues ahead of time. We realized they have not tested this on people. You can't do this. And the little test they did, now that information has come out, it was deadly. 80% of the women that were pregnant lost their baby. And the head of the CDC, Rachel Walensky, came out after she's seen that report. We haven't seen it. Said it's perfectly safe for any woman to get at any stage of pregnancy. And they knew that was a lie. Why? Because they're from the father of lies. And why is it always about death? It's because Satan loves death. And whether it's the death of your morality, the death of your purity, your family, your business, he loves death. He hates when we are doing things God would have us to do, being productive, being industrious. He loves when we're doing that. That's what he created us to do. The forced vaccines, the Nuremberg Code says you can never force anyone on the planet to take a medical, especially experimental thing, without their express consent, where they say, yeah, I'll take that. And they just say, we don't care. You're fired, you're out of the military, you're not a pilot anymore, you're done. And it was all the big businesses that have total control. So it whipped people into submission, so millions and millions more took it that even didn't want to because they were scared for their job. I'm telling you right now, listen to me. Don't ever do what you know is not a good thing to do to preserve something. Don't do that. God will provide. If you are being courageous and you're like, I don't care, he can fire me. If you have a job for someone, that means you know how to do something, and so you start doing it on your own and compete with them. But you do not, well, I had to. No, we can't do that as Christians. The world needs our example of having the courage, because we have hope. So even if we die of COVID, big whoop. I mean, seriously, we're going to heaven. Do you believe that? A Christian shouldn't be scared of things like that. We're the ones in the 80s that were going in and taking care of the AIDS patients. We said, yeah, we might get away. We don't care. We need to tell these people about Jesus. So if we get it, then God's in charge of that. I'm not going to get it unless that's his plan when I'm doing what he's asked me to do, loving my neighbor. I don't have to worry about those things. Climate change. That whole thing has been fifth generation warfare. The entire thing is a lie, based on lies, not even half-truths. It's complete. You can tell when someone's going after the objective of brainwashing you when they tell you the exact opposite of the truth. It's not just a lie that's off a little bit. You can recover from that sometimes. But when it's opposite, the mind has a hard time going from here to here on an issue. When you believe this is true and they tell you, no, it's the opposite, it's like, it's a bridge too far for the mind, and that's when you know someone has been brainwashed. But real quick, climate change, this is important because it's not going away. It's their religion, and it is what will implement, whenever it happens one day, the totalitarian world government of the Antichrist. It will be over the climate. I know it will, because you can't step down from that grand of movement, we're saving the planet, and go to something less than that. You would lose all your people. Here's the fact. CO2, they say, is a pollutant. Now, if you didn't go to government schools, that's laughable. It's like, what? CO2 is plant food, and there's not near enough of it in the atmosphere. We only have 400 parts per million right now. The optimum level of CO2 for everything that is green is 1,600 parts per million. We're at 1/4 of the optimum level for everything that's green. That's why greenhouse growers pump in carbon dioxide to double, triple, and quadruple the level so the plants just explode. Every time you double CO2, plant growth efficiency increases 35%. So that means if you had a tomato plant that's outside of a greenhouse and one that's inside of a greenhouse, it's going to produce, if you just double the CO2 in there to 800 parts, it's going to produce 35% more tomatoes, the exact same plant. That's how much it loves CO2. An oak tree will go to full maturity in about 25 years instead of 50. So it's again, a complete opposite of the lie. But what are we doing to get rid of CO2? The thing that everything green desperately needs, and we're at the low level of the scale. All the alternative energies. Why do they want that? Because they're expensive and they're unreliable. So you're going to be poor. They always want poverty, because poor people are very easy to control. So they're always working to rob your wealth, to make it harder to get by. They love inflation. They love anything. It's a struggle to survive, because they know then you'll be busy surviving and they can keep doing all their stuff and you won't have time to mess with it. Warming is bad. If you've ever been down to the earthquake, I went on a mission trip to Ecuador one summer, and you stand right there on the equator and you'll go, warming isn't bad. Life loves warming. Right there where it's the hottest place on the planet, the biodiversity of plants and animals is incredible. And you go up to Alaska or northern Canada and you see, ooh, cold is the enemy of life. Nothing can hardly survive up here at all. Opposite of the truth. There are too many people, they tell us. Well, you know that's straight from Satan, because he hates us because we're made in the image of God. But the reality is, if you study demography, the world's population is getting ready to collapse. The only reason there's been more people is because of modern medicine has allowed people to live longer, but the birth rates have already dropped below replacement. And so once we get up to, I think we'll get up to about 9 billion, and then it's going to just drop off a cliff. As that generation dies, there's no one to replace them, and we're going to have poverty worldwide. Adam Smith said 200 years ago, you can never have a prospering economy with declining populations, because nothing's worth anything. Like in this area, if 50 years from now, half the number of people live here, what do you think a home's going to be worth? Nothing, because there'll be all empty ones everywhere. It makes everything just go into utter poverty. Total lies. The Ukraine war, it's about freedom, good versus evil. Putin unprovocably attacked. That's all a lie. I hate communists, as you know, anyone that knows me. So I'm not pro-communist, but the Biden administration wanted to have the war for many reasons, to sidetrack, to have a funding thing where they can just pump billions of dollars that are unaccounted into this corrupt government over there, so it can come back to them, a lot of it. It can go out to all their buddies and pay them off. There's no accounting for that. Anyone that would send money to a country and say, no, you don't have to give an account of the $120 billion we've given you, it's corrupt right there. Because everyone would want an accounting. Every Democrat, every Republican, every citizen that paid those taxes would want an accounting, but they don't have it. The key, as that war goes on and all the things happen, a couple key things you can't ever forget. That war is Biden's war. It would never have happened. Putin would never have stepped across that line if Biden would have said what he should have said. Hey, Putin, I just want you to know the Ukraine will never be part of NATO. And it never would have happened. The man that founded NATO, the one that started NATO, said, if you ever invite the Ukraine into NATO, it'll be like sticking a stick in the Russians' face. It will provoke a war because they don't want our weapons right on their border. They want a little buffer zone there, which is the same thing we wanted. When the Soviet Union was going to put nukes in Cuba, what did we say? No, you won't. And John F. Kennedy, no, you're not doing that. We will not allow that. And so they had to get those things out of there. No big superpower wants those weapons right on their doorstep, and so it's logical. But so much of that I don't have time to get into, but the Biden administration blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, which hurts Europe. It's devastating Germany. They're going to collapse back into communism is my guess of what's going to happen because they are really hurting now because of that. It's just, they also want to clean the slate in the Ukraine. Already, half of the population has left the Ukraine. I don't know if you know that. Half of everyone that lives there has already left to another country. And then 400-some thousand have died. They want to start the New World Order country there. And what's amazing, I showed it on Agenda Weekly a year and a half or two ago, before the war started, they had put out an advertisement, the Ukraine, of what they were going to do after the war. The war had not started yet. And they said, after the war and our country has been decimated, we're going to become the most modern country in the world. They're going to have a government that's just a supercomputer. It's not people elected anymore. Everything is run through the supercomputer. And you'll have just a digital ID to pay for everything, to register your car. You won't have to have driver's license. You won't have to have, and they're talking about how wonderful it is. They produced that before the war, the first shot was ever fired. And I said, oh, they're letting us know like they always do. Here's their plan. It was just crystal clear. Anyway, I could go on and on. All part of the fifth generation warfare, of course, is the redefinition of marriage, family, gender. That's all part of this battle. When you can't even be certain if someone's a man or a woman, the confusion in society, that's just, it's going to make you shut up is what's going to happen. Because if you can't even know that for sure, then you're just like, I better be quiet. I don't even know what you can know anymore if you can't know something biological fact like that. January 6th, that whole thing is a total lie. I hope you know that. The rabble-rousing going on, which wasn't even that major in there, was at least 20 FBI agents were in there. Black Lives Matter, Antifa, a lot of radical groups. And again, not that much happened. There's some vandalism, which is not good. But most of the people, if you've watched now all the actual footage in there, they were patriotically walking through there, and the doors had been opened, they'd been let in, and they weren't defaming anything or hurting anything at all. Just a few radicals at the very beginning, and I think they were all of the other side trying to provoke the crowd to do that because President Trump hadn't even finished speaking yet. Well, if you went all the way to Washington, D.C. to hear your president speak, you're not going to leave an hour before he's done and go to the Capitol and start doing that. You're like, no, I came here to hear him speak. So anyway, it's just all smoke and mirrors. But the lie, fifth generation warfare is, it was an insurrection. An insurrection is taking over a government, and no one had a weapon. Please. What, are you going to yell at them and take over America? You stop it now, or we're going to, what are you going to do? No, it's so ridiculous, but you can't let their propaganda showing the few people pushing the police and doing the gates, you can't let that, you have to look at facts. Because it's always going to be propaganda what you're getting. What's the facts? How many people were armed with machine guns? None? How dare you call it insurrection? What kind of stupidity is that in a modern age? You know, and if they were wanting to have an insurrection, they could have done that. There's lots of people with guns in America, but they weren't. They were there for a peaceful protest to let Congress know, you know what? We really think there was problems with this election. Would you check into it, please? And they knew it was a prime opportunity to not have the doors locked like they always are, to force everybody by the building. Normally you can't get near the building to be on the grass, and they made everyone walk up around the building in the muddy grass, and all the sidewalks were blocked off. It was just so many things that you go, oh, that's a lie. One last one here. The lie that's talked by everybody nowadays is America is a democracy. Our founders said a democracy is the wicked form of government ever. A democracy is mob rule. If we had a democracy, all it takes is 51% of the people to say, we want black people to be slaves, and then they're slaves. Or white people to be slaves, and then they're slaves. Or 51% can confiscate all the money of everyone else. In a democracy, we have a constitutional republic, which means it's ruled by laws, and everyone is supposed to be accountable to the laws. They have changed that where they're above the law now, and they're not supposed to be, but that's what's wrecking our country. I mean, if they had been, paid the penalty for all the crimes they've committed, I mean, so many of the last 3 or 4 presidents, endless crimes, real crimes, if they would have been in jail, it would have saved us a lot of suffering. But so, the interesting thing about the fifth generation warfare is it can be an ad on TV during the football game that's all propaganda. And so you're not expecting an attack. I was watching the football game, and the little commercial there just gave you a few nuggets of poison, and to push a certain agenda or to push things, or the evening news, it's just all orchestrated. You've seen the little clips when they're all saying the same thing the exact same way. Well, that's not an accident. It's all purposeful, and you have to see that. But the effect of it and the purpose of it is brainwashing, so they can totally control us and everybody else. But the main channels they've done this in, of course, is education. They knew the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. That's why they wanted you women out of the home. Go get a job and do something meaningful. We'll raise the little snotty-nosed kids for you. Because they knew that's the most powerful position in the world, women, raising the next generation. And you men need to be involved in that too. But I'm saying that's when they're pulled away from their parents, where their parents don't have the influence they're supposed to have anymore, things fall apart because a child doesn't know very much, so they're very easily deceived by the lies. The music and film industry, it's just rotten to the core. They know when you see it on a movie, you feel like you've really seen something, but it's not true. And so they can have movies where you watch this guy's life and all his sin has no consequences. Well, that's not the way the world works. But they know how powerful those models are for our young people. And they know the role models. That's why they found people, almost every Hollywood movie star, the musicians, a lot of even the sports figures, but they are people that they knew would do whatever for fame and fortune. Satan, in Matthew, when Jesus is taken up to the mount, with Satan, and Satan says, I'll give you the kingdoms of this world if you'll bow down and worship me. And of course, Jesus said, no, thank you. But when I read that, I go, wait a minute. What does that mean? It means he has the power to give the kingdoms of this world. He can give fame and fortune to anyone he wants. And once that clicked in my mind, I started to realize that's why most of the super rich of the world, that they're all wicked to the core, because Satan gave them their fame and fortune. He saw them. Many rock stars over the years have come out and said, yeah, I made a deal with the devil. Bob Dylan on a 60 Minutes said, yeah, I did. And he made me, and some of his friends that knew him the summer he made the deal with the devil, they said at the beginning of the summer, he was no good on the guitar at all. And at the end of the summer, he was incredible. And he became a star overnight. And he said, yeah, I owe it to the one who rules above. But he was talking about the Lucifer. They all understand this is a spiritual battle, anyone really in it. They do not argue that there's a God. They do not argue. They just think Lucifer is the light bearer. He is the one to follow. Sammy Davis Jr. once in an interview, I heard him say, Satan is way more powerful than God. And he was trying to convince the guy. He goes, I'm following him because he's way more powerful. I mean, but these people, that's where they're getting this from, and he's picking the useful idiots that will sell their soul to him. He'll give them the fame and fortune because he knows they will be the example to pull young people into the pit of hell by following their example in the drugs, sex, rock and roll, the culture that is rotten, trying to destroy everything. And we've got to say no, and we've got to protect our children from that garbage. Of course, they use the news media. Social media today has given them a whole nother level of brainwashing because they can have all these bots on there. As we found out when Elon Musk was buying Twitter, how many accounts do you actually have on here? And they never even released it to the public, but it was clear millions of those accounts were just robots, just computers that were all come from a leftist point of view, commenting on things and attacking people that said something conservative and stuff. So you go, this whole thing, they wanted you to learn there on your little phone. If I say something that's conservative or Christian, I get attacked. No one likes being attacked, so it shuts you up. And then when you say something that the world likes, you get thumbs up and hearts. Man, that's awesome. Well, most of those were bots doing all that, and still are today, I bet. But they learned how to whip people into submission. Karl Marx said that you need to get society segmented into age-segregated peer grouping. You want to age segregate peer groups, so 11-year-olds always around 11-year-olds, and 12-year-olds always around 12-year-olds, so they'll never become wise. If you always hang around with those that are just as ignorant as you are, you will never be wise. The Bible says, he that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but the companion of fools shall be destroyed. You wonder why we're losing all our children and grandchildren? That's why. They have to be around wisdom and those that are older, to learn how to listen, to learn how to get understanding and wisdom. And then as that process is happening, they learn that's the way the world works. So when they're around someone that's younger than them, they feel the responsibility. Oh, I better warn him about this. So they've stopped, Marxism has stopped the flow of wisdom to the generations. They've cut it off. Like, we don't want any of that to happen. We want these kids with their own age group from the day they're born till the day they die. And so they will listen to whatever we tell them because they don't know anything better. And it just goes on and on here. I'm going to just start wrapping up here with a few things. This, again, I love studying the idea, and the movies are about this, showing how long this has been happening. So people don't think it's some new thing, some flash in the pan. No, it's been going on for over 100 years. Those that were wicked and evil saw America as the city on a hill. They saw it as a Christian nation and said, if we want world government, America has got to go. And we have to rot it from the inside out. And that's when they started penetrating all the institutions of influence to just rot us down and collapse us from within. And that's what we see. And there's just so much of it here that some of the books, real quick, I'll just mention a few that were instrumental in the other side, understanding how to manipulate people. In 1895, there was a book written called The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon, and he had studied this, and he realized something that gave them a big advantage, because they all read that book and go, okay. He said, if you can get people into a crowd, then you can get them to do things they would never do on their own. Once you get them in a crowd atmosphere, and he talks in there about, and here's how to work them into a crowd, and here's how to pop yourself up as the leader of the crowd where you can get them to do whatever you want. And people studied that, especially on the other side, realizing, ooh, we like that idea. That's why they divide us into so many different groups. They want us in our own little crowds so they can pop up the leader of that crowd saying, here's what we need to do. Okay, yeah, let's go do that. And one of the crowds is even patriotism. They want us to be blindly patriotic. You can't do that. Most of what our government has done in the last 70, 80 years is not good if you study it. It's just not. Everything you think you know about World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, it's a total lie. After 50 years of history, the amazing thing that happens is all the top secret documents are declassified. So after 50 years, they go, oh, everyone's dead that was involved in this, so they don't mind releasing those. Well, some researchers go in there then and dig through all the files. What really went on? And some of those books written from those top secret declassified documents let you know, oh my goodness, it's not anything what we were told. Anything, even as a conservative Christian raised in a good family, most of what I was taught, and my parents thought it was right too at the time, is not true. Our government has been wicked, which makes sense because wickedness is attracted to power. A Christian man's not. I don't want to control anybody. I want to be a good influence on them, a good friend to them, an encouragement to them, but I'm not trying to control anybody. They have a lust for power, those especially that are following Satan, because he has such a lust for power. He always wants to mimic God, and God's in total control. He knows that, so he's trying to get in total control. But that book was instrumental. Then in 1928, a book called Propaganda came out, and that was the game changer. It was by Edward Bernays. He was a Madison Avenue executive that would do ad campaigns and stuff for people. One of them, the pork industry, came to him back then and said, we can't get people to eat bacon for breakfast because they think it's not good for them. And so he thought, okay, what do I do here to help them eat that? And he did a survey across America, like a Gallup poll, and to find out who do people respect the most. And back then in the 20s, guess who it was? The doctors. They're doctors. So he started having commercials on TV where doctors were recommending eating bacon for breakfast. And the industry just took off because they know, oh, he'll trust the doctor. So when the doctor says, I really think you should have this, even though he's just being paid to tell you that, and it's not true, and it's amazing. And then the tobacco industry came to him and said, we've got a big problem. 50% of the population will not even consider smoking. And he's like, who's that? He goes, the women. They think it's a dirty, nasty habit. What do we do? He said, let me think about that. And he realized, okay, the role model is so important. He went down to Madison Avenue and hired all the beautiful supermodels of the day, got them all to have a parade through New York City, all smoking, and he called them their torches of liberty. And he goes, they're to liberate you from the patriarchy. So the feminist movement got into smoking. They're, oh, this is a symbol that I'm breaking away from the patriarchy. But then what happened is while he was doing that, our government was watching, and they hired him and said, how can we get the citizens to do what we want them to do? And he started working solely for the government and coming up with all the campaigns to get us into wars and things because it's patriotic. He knew, oh, if you cloak it in the flag, most people really love this country. They'll do whatever you say if it's cloaked in patriotism. And so we were a sucker for that. And I know I look back over my life, yeah, I was a sucker a few times too, when it was a total lie. Because I do love this country, and I just assumed if a guy's waving a flag saying, I love this country, he means it. But I was very naive. that most of the time means he doesn't mean it. Especially if it's a politician. He knows that's what you want to hear, so he sets things up so you will do what he wants you to do, but you'll think you were doing the right thing. It's so key. So many of these things, of course, in modern times, and I'm sure you've heard about that probably at church and stuff here and other places, but the World Economic Forum, familiar with them? They're kind of the face. They're not the top dogs, but they're the face of the New World Order in the agenda for 2030 and beyond. 2030 is really a key year. I just want you to know that. They've have put a date on when they want to accomplish their goals. I don't think they'll reach them all by then, but it gives them all the energy to move forward because it's getting closer. It's getting closer. As you probably know, if you don't, I'm going to read a couple of these to you. This is all fifth-generation warfare. When you want someone to do something, you tell them, oh, this is what you'll be doing in 2030, as if to prime them or, oh, I guess, yeah, they told us this was going to happen. So you just accept it. But goal number one, You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. What's the first plank of the Communist Manifesto? The abolition of all private property. This is all communism, is all it is. The New World Order, the world they're creating is a communistic world where they're in total control and you are subject to do whatever they tell you. Goal number 2, this one's shocking just because America is totally involved with the World Economic Forum. Biden was speaking at their meetings and everything. Goal number 2 is the U.S., by 2030, the U.S. won't be the world's leading superpower anymore. Do you think Red China is going to be a better leading superpower, or Russia, or Iran, and the open borders are a key thing. Goal number 5 here, 1 billion people will be displaced by climate change. That's setting it up. It's not climate change, it's them rearranging the people in the world, because if you have patriotic populations like America, you got to dilute it down. That's why millions are coming in right now. Total strategy, you dilute the population out, where you start to get millions in there that could care less about America. They just want something for free. And so you lose that cohesion that holds everything together, unifies you, and on it goes. A few things to be doing, and then we'll get to questions here. I'm going to read you just a couple sentences out of this. America has been through crises before. And I'm going to read you something that was written December 23rd, 1776. And it's called The American Crisis. But listen to this. I just want you to know, our founding fathers were up against the most powerful military in the entire world. A country that had ruled the world for 1,000 years. And it was pastors and farmers that said, we're not going to allow them to do this to us. They have no right. And it was God, of course, who blessed their little efforts to beat the biggest superpower. But this was the mindset of men back then. This needs to be our mindset today. Here it is right here. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of men and women. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. We found out through history it takes blood is what buys you freedom, whether it's freedom from your sins by Jesus' blood being shed on the cross, or it's to overcome tyranny, but that's the price. It's such a high price, but we didn't value it like that, to preserve it like that. We allowed them to take God out of the schools and do whatever, and we're like, it'll be okay. And we didn't preserve that, and it disintegrated. Here's a few things you can do, and then we'll go straight to questions. You need to reject all the nonsense. If there's more vaccinations coming, which there will be, you have to say, no gracias. I'm not interested. Digital passports, IDs, digital currencies, no thank you. I'm not interested. I'm not putting on a mask. I'm not doing all the foolish things to submit to authority that is outside of their jurisdiction. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives them the authority to tell you what you have to do in those type of things. We need to speak up and express our opinions. There was a great essay written by Alexander Solzhenitsyn back in the 70s. He was a famous dissident from the Soviet Union, and they'd kept him in the gulag for decades, but he was a famous writer. And the last essay he wrote to the Russian people that were enslaved in communism, he titled it, "Live Not by Lies." And he said in there, when you submit to their rules, you're living by a lie. Because you say behind the scenes, well, I don't agree with this is wrong, but you do it. He said, and he encouraged the people of Russia, and it changed Russia over the next 10 years. They started to have protests and things they'd never had before. They're under communism. But he said, if you're in a meeting and they say something untrue, get up and walk out. You sitting there is condoning what the lie that was spoken. He goes, if you're at the theater or whatever, seeing a play or a movie, and it's a lie, you get up and you walk out. He goes, we have to not live by lies. Especially as a Christian, you're only here to speak the truth and tell others about the truth, which is Jesus. And so, I mean, we have to be bold. The worst thing that can happen is maybe we sit a few years and rot in a prison, have a prison ministry, and then we go home to be with the Lord. I mean, we have to really think like that. We can't let the world's propaganda, they want everyone scared to death of dying so they can tempt you with fear of death and you'll do what they say. A Christian shouldn't be scared of dying. You should be looking forward to it. You should be like, oh, I can't wait. Whenever God's time, I know that's when I'll go. I'm going to be busy until I get there, but I want to be diligent right now to shine my light, which means I'm speaking the truth. I'm exposing lies. When a lie is spoken in my presence, you can very nicely, when you have the truth, you don't need to be rude. You just say, I don't agree with that, and I'll tell you why. And then you just give them your 2 cents of nuggets, and if they don't like it, that's their problem. But you did what was right, and you let them know everyone's not on their side, and that's important. So they don't just feel pressured, oh, everyone thinks this is okay. When we don't stand up, the whole world thinks, I guess you just have to submit. But when we're saying, no, you can fire me if you want, I'm not taking that shot, you might give the courage to someone else there that all of a sudden, okay, I'm not either. And it might have saved their life. They might have got one of the batches that was poison or whatever. So defend the defenseless, build back what's been broken down, reinforce what remains, hold on to your state here as long as you can on the islands of freedom, take advantage of the freedoms you have and stand to preserve them, put back the ancient landmarks that have been taken down, invent creative solutions to the tyranny that's coming. That's, in America, we're like, okay, you're going to have a digital currency, we're going to come up with some other way of buying and selling with each other. And we're not interested in your foolishness. That's the wonderful thing about being where we are. We have such a tradition of solving problems with businesses and things, but disconnect from the system and defund the enemy. You really need to do that, because if we're buying and spending money at places that are just spending their profits to tear us down further, that's not a wise thing to do. Real quick, Crockett, was he going to play the 1-minute trailer? Okay, we're going to do maybe just a 1-minute trailer about Agenda Weekly. If you don't know what that is, it kind of explains that. It's something I do each week that you can subscribe to. And if you subscribe here, you get a twin pack of both movies for free. We're wanting to try to stretch our influence that God's given us and be a blessing and encouragement. And this we'll talk about what it is, and then we'll do question and answers.
Welcome to Agenda Weekly. We invite you to join us for an overview of the news from a conservative Christian perspective. You may be familiar with a weekly video podcast from Curtis Bowers, but Agenda Weekly is much more than that. Every Friday, we provide a written summary of the most important news events from America and around the world. We don't just cover the bad news. We find the often overlooked encouraging stories, because we all need some good news. Additional resources include informative videos and articles to dig deeper, a featured hymn of the week, essential prayer points, and specific actions to take personally and in your community. For only $5 a month, less than a cup of coffee, you can subscribe to receive the most comprehensive news source available. Our goal is to save you time, expose the agenda behind the news, and equip you to make an impact right where you are. Subscribe today at agendaweekly.com.
Good morning and welcome to the Liberty Church Edmond family. We're thrilled to have you join our adventure today. If you're new around here, consider yourself official.
Welcome. That sounded very inviting and hospitable. We also have this one pack here that those that are interested, it has everything that we have, all our books and videos and music CDs. We have some beautiful CDs over there from my wife, just singing peaceful hymns. And they're just, we need peace. We need times in our life each day where we're stopping to remember God is God, and I can trust in him, and he's worth worshiping, and he's worth serving, and that will give you the courage to stand for the truth, because you realize he loves that when we do that. So, but anyway, that's something over there with the posters and everything. It's $100. All the stuff on our website, I think it's about $200. So it's at a discount for us being here. But just want to let you know about that.
Ladies and gentlemen, I could not endorse or support Curtis more than I do. Curtis is one of those resources that I trust. As I said a little while ago, as soon as I get my microphone on, you'll be able to hear me better. Curtis has been one of the sources of information that I have gone to provide accurate information for you all. And I, as you all know about me, I'm one of those people that's an Acts 17:11 Christian. I listen to everything that's said, but I don't believe anything that's said until I've been able to check it out. And Curtis has been one of those guys that has withstood the inspection. So the Agenda movie is excellent. As a matter of fact, I forgot, that was back in 2010. You covered climate in 2010 before very many people were talking about climate. But Agenda and Agenda 2 are excellent movies, documentaries. And then I would recommend subscribing to the weekly. Actually, I was aware of the podcast. I wasn't aware of the new news service. How long have you been doing that?
We've been doing it a few years.
Okay. Would you tell everybody, when you were serving in the Idaho legislature, what brought to your attention what was really going on behind the scenes?
Well, I had been in 1992. I had been invited to go to this communist meeting at the University of California, Berkeley, and I went for a friend of my father's who had studied communism his whole life, and he was wondering, why are they having a meeting? Because remember, the Berlin Wall came down in '89, and then the Soviet Union dissolved in '91. This was 6 months later, the summer of '92, and he said, would you go to this communist meeting? I just wonder what they're talking about, because we won. It's over. And so I went just as a favor to him, and anyway, so I went to that meeting and gave him the notes. I had a little hidden recorder, and gave him the stuff that I'd taken and went about my life. Well, 16 years later, I didn't realize that God had in the plans for me. The governor appointed me to be a representative, and all of a sudden I'm thrown in there. I write a letter about that meeting from 16 years before and talk about what their agenda had been to undermine our families and our businesses and our morality. That was their threefold attack. And anyway, writing that letter, I got so attacked. People were protesting at the Capitol. And all I said is, this is what they said at a communist meeting 16 years ago, and look where we are today. And it was all stuff that was happening right now, but it seemed crazy when I'd gone to that meeting. Like they said in 1992 at the communist meeting, they said, we're going to use the environmental movement to destroy free enterprise in America. And I was like, but 92, that's 31 years ago. It was just not a movement. It was people chaining themselves to trees in Oregon and stuff. And so, but the backlash from that, and a gentleman wrote in defending me saying, what Representative Bauer says is true, but it's nothing new. That was all written in a book in 1958. And I got the book called The Naked Communist, and I read those goals, and that's when I knew, God, America needs to know about this. How can I tell them? And he slowly pushed on me to make a movie. I'd never made a movie in my life, didn't know anything about it. And he just kept pushing me. I go, okay, I'll do it, help me. And he did, like Paul said, which is so neat, how God, just obey what God tells you to do. That very first movie that we totally did by ourselves, everything about it, the music, the color, the editing, the filming, everything, because we didn't know anybody in film, it won the largest single cash prize film festival in America. I just love that, because that's God, that's not me. I didn't know what I was doing, but I did the best I could do, and he obviously directed my path. But it was from the Naked Communist. When I saw that, I started to boil. Our enemy gave us the plans, and we have allowed them to do this? You got to be kidding. I called my dad and let him have it. He goes, I've been standing against this my whole life. I go, I know you have, Dad, but why didn't your whole generation just rise up and say no? Because they've accomplished all the goals now. If you read it, it's sobering. And these goals were radical in 1958.
Who is behind, well, I would call it, of course you identified it, Edward Bernays, the psych op that we've been enduring here in the country. Is, in your opinion, because obviously, just your opinion, Is our CIA behind all this?
Of totally. Our CIA is rotten to the core and always has been. It was never, there might be a decent agent here and there because some patriotic people go into those things thinking they're doing whatever, and they've probably done a decent thing at some point. But the core of it, the leadership of it, from Allen Dulles Ford, who was rotten and evil to the core, he's the one that had John F. Kennedy assassinated. If you dig in and study, it's been rotten. But here's what shows you it's been rotten. Before, it was the CIA, it was the, help me, OSS, yeah, I always forget that. The OSS. Well, the OSS was formed during World War II for intelligence. But who was our buddies during World War II? The Soviets. So half of it was Soviet agents in there because we wanted them in there to help us gather information. But they were never fired or released. So then the Cold War starts, and half of the CIA is already communists, literal communists, and then the other half was all the Nazis. After the Nuremberg trials, only a few people were actually executed. All the top Nazi officers were slipped into America by Allen Dulles and became part of the CIA because they had done experiments on psychologically brainwashing people. They had done that way more than anybody else had, and even physical experiments on people, and they wanted to learn from them. How did you brainwash the people to call Hitler Lord? I mean, the children called him Lord in Nazi Germany. And how'd you do that? And they wanted to know. So you've got the Nazis and the communists coming together, which are just two sides of the same coin. They're very similar. And anyway, but yeah, so it's been rotten to the core. It is rotten today, and it's doing nothing but trying to take America down and to implement this globalist vision of a one world government.
I don't think anybody would question that the mastermind behind all this is not the current usurper in the White House. Joe Biden has a hard time even finding his way on the stage and off the stage. And you mentioned the World Economic Forum a while ago. Klaus Schwab, we know George Soros, we know Bill Gates. Who do you think, other than Satan, which we know ultimately is behind all this, who do you think ultimately is calling the shots right now? Or if there was a table of global mobsters, who would be seated at that table?
It's those secret societies which they've had. Cecil Rhodes, have you ever heard of him? And have you ever heard of Rhodes Scholarships? Okay, that's him. He became super wealthy in the late 1800s, was a wicked man. He died in his 40s, an alcoholic, and he loved molesting children. He talks about in his own book. But he had an experience, I believe, with demonic forces that gave him a vision for the world. He said, we're going to have the religious, economic, and political unification of the world. And he had gone down to South Africa and throughout Africa in his early 20s because he heard they had discovered diamonds down there. So he went down there, and through an amazing turn of events, I think Satan blessing him because he knew this guy was mine, he became one of the main shareholders of all the diamond mines in Africa. They even named a country after him. Have you ever heard of Rhodesia? That was after Cecil Rhodes. They still have my sons were over there on a mission trip. They still have a statue of him there, Cecil Rhodes. Well, he took the money in the Rhodes Scholarships, and what's that is to buy up all the brightest, sharpest minds in the world and pull them into the one world agenda. That's why you offer them a free scholarship and don't ask anything in return. But if they ever prosper up into a position of power, then they pull them into the secret groups. But his first group, the demonic vision he had, and he talks about it, I've got the written there, but I could read it to you, but he said, I just knew we were supposed to start a secret society for a one world government. And his first society was called the Society of the Elect. And, but from that group, that's where it started. In the modern age, Satan used that to get this, all the people marching towards Satan's vision of sitting where he wants to be, possessing the Antichrist and ruling the world. But he started that, and the rich people of the world started coming there to visit, and he would sell them what they're doing. And they said at his meetings, after a luncheon, most of the wealthy families that the Rockefellers had brought to the meeting for him, because he was partners with the Rothschilds, with the Rothschilds in England on the mines. When he brought them there, he would give them the vision, and they said, most families said, we're in. Our entire family fortune's in. So that's why it's so unified, all the super rich. But he Just one second on that. So then John D. Rockefeller went over there and sat in on one of the meetings and came back and started the Council on Foreign Relations, which has controlled America since 1921. Almost every decision by a Republican or Democrat is made by them because they've sold themselves as the brains of Washington, D.C. And so that's why our foreign policy is always so inconsistent with the talk of our people. I mean, they're funding communists behind the scene, but then giving anti-communist speeches and stuff. When you study, you're like, what's going on? Well, that's what was going on. But the Bilderberger Group, the Trilateral Commission that the Rockefellers also started, and there's a bunch of these, handful of these groups. They really are the ones that they have just annual meetings regularly, all of them, and they're plotting. Okay, what's next? Okay, we got to get behind the environmental movement. And they own, because they're the wealthy of the world, they own most of the media of the world. They own most of the colleges and universities. They've given the big donations, so they are in charge of what's going on there. So and they own most of the governments of the world because they've funded all the politicians. So it really is just this elite clique of people that are really controlling things. But again, Satan is absolutely the mastermind behind it. But that's what it is, and that's why it's so hard to combat, because every little country, every little person is doing your own thing, and they've all got a plan, though. They're all marching to the same drum, and we're all trying to do our own thing.
And their plan goes over centuries. That's one of the reasons it's satanic.
Yes.
Other than William Bradford and the Pilgrims, we have never thought beyond our day. William Bradford said, if we're nothing but stepping stones for our children and grandchildren, so be it. Only Satan could be behind something that is so well orchestrated for so many centuries.
Yes.
So now let me ask also a question. Why is it, now you made an excellent point, I hope everybody caught. Satan is behind death. Okay, look at LGBT. If all of a sudden there was an atomic bomb and there were 2 men left on planet Earth, what happens to the human species? It dies, okay? So that agenda is death. Abortion is death. Why do you have an opinion as to why it seems like whenever there's a communist takeover, there is always a great starvation, and a substantial percentage of the population dies whenever? It doesn't matter with Cuba, it doesn't matter whether it was Russia. Do you have any opinions on why?
Well, twofold. One, a lot of it is they do it themselves to create the fear. So you totally submit. When you're being tortured in prison, then they let you out. One of the guys I've interviewed in Agenda 2, he said when he was 18 years old, he was growing up in Cuba and Castro had just taken over. He goes, I'm just walking down the street, going to my job, and they throw you in a police car, took you to prison, beat you. And this guy now was 65 years old when I was talking to him, and he's still shaking. And I said, what happened in prison? And he looked at me and goes, he wouldn't tell me. I mean, it was so horrible. And he goes, you're so terror of them, you just do exactly as you're told. He goes, when he escaped Cuba, he didn't even tell his own mother and father, because he goes, every family has an informant and you're not sure who it is. And so you don't talk to anybody. You're just complete silence. It's just like 1984, the book, where you're scared. Big Brother's always watching. But now with our phones and everything, he's really watching. He's videoing too. And everything, it's crazy. We're living, that technology now has given them finally the ability they've never had to literally control every human on the planet. That's never been, they've always wanted to do that since the Tower of Babel. They always want, but now, yeah, if they microchip everybody and do whatever, you could literally, but the reason the death comes is because their ways do not work. Communism does not work because it defies God's principles. Socialism does not work because it defies God's principles. So it will always end in death, but they don't mind that. They are, again, it's a satanic thing that was given to Karl Marx, and he was a Satanist. And what it does is they don't want so many people to control. That's why their number one goal right now worldwide is to cut population. So I always tell people, will there be more wars? Yes. 100% certain. Will there be more, pandemics? Yes. Because they hate us, and they think they're so above us. That's why it's the peons. Like, if 50 million people, that's what Stalin said, one person dies, it's a tragedy, 1 million people die, it's a statistic. It doesn't even matter. And he killed 20, 30 million of his own people. 1 million of them were hardcore members of the Communist Party. He killed them all off in one night when he thought someone might rise up against him. So the whole Communist Party was in terror of him. It's all about death. It's all about destruction. Communism is the only system in the world that rewards whoever is the most ruthless with the top position. Every time, Mao, 80 million of his own people in China, it's whoever will slaughter his best friend, he's going to be the head. And that's like Satan. But that's what it is as you study it. It's a killing machine. Dr. Noble said in my first movie, a man I love, Dr. David Noble, Summit Ministries, he said, it's the greatest killing machine in the history of the world, Marxism, and it's true.
Tell me about Vladimir Zelensky.
I mean, he is an actor, as you know. He's just a puppet up there like any other puppet, just doing exactly what he's told. That's why sometimes he'll say something and then they have him change course a week later and say something different or whatever. They found a stooge. Again, he liked being the star of the TV shows over there where he was playing the president, and I'm sure they came to him and said, we'd like you to be the president. He goes, great. It's going to give me a nice life. His wife was seen about 2 months ago in Switzerland spending just hundreds of thousands of dollars shopping. And the guy videos like there and stuff like, whoa, is that some of our tax dollars? Of course it is. It's all just a scheme, whatever. And there's a lot of, again, we love the Ukrainian people and we love the Russian people. I love Russians. They love their country and they love their families and stuff like that. We don't want war. War is about death. And it's not like it's a freedom. It's not that. It hardly ever is. They paint it like that so our boys will be willing to die. But you look back over history and go, most of these wars weren't about really freeing anything. It was a political game where it was building up the military-industrial complex, or wherever. It wasn't about, no, these people are enslaved, we are going to free them, which would be worth dying for. It's not that, because you look at the countries, when we're done with them, they're far worse off than when we started, and you're like, that wasn't a good thing.
What percentage, if anybody ever had any question about the deep state, it should have been answered with the election of Donald Trump. And the example that I would point to is that when Barack Obama was still president, Congress voted 70 times to repeal Obamacare. And then when Donald Trump was elected president, of course, they had cover. They knew that he would simply veto their action. And once Donald Trump was in office, the same Congress would not vote to repeal Obamacare. So do we really have two-party system? Or let me ask this. What percentage of our Congress do you believe is not co-op?
Oh, maybe 5% or so. I mean, there's only a handful of people that really love this country, really would be willing to make the decision, even if it cost them their job position, to do what is right. It's just a couple of them. When I was a representative in Idaho, I learned that was the biggest wake-up call for me of anything. Idaho at that time was the most conservative state, nothing even close. We had a 91% Republican victory in the presidential elections, 91%. So, I mean, it's not even close. And I get in there with the guys I've looked up to. You know, we've even campaigned for some of them and stuff. And also I'm thrown in there in God's plan. And I get to know as I'm sitting next to these guys. And I'm like, oh, I'm kind of admiring them because I'm like, oh. And all of a sudden I realize it's just talk. They give you a speech that'll put tears in your eyes. But when I say, guys, why don't we do this? Our platform says, you know, we're for small business. Let's do a personal property tax relief bill for small business. And I co-signed onto this thing, and we couldn't get it through there. And we have an 85% majority in the House, the Senate, and the governor. You have everything you would ever dream of having in America. It'll never happen in America like that again. No state will have an 85% majority of both bodies and have the governor. And we couldn't pass anything. And that's kind of where agenda came from, too. I was like, something's going on here. This system has been corrupted. What's happened, I think, is it got so dirty for so long, the decent man that should be stepping up to do that. It's like, I don't want to be involved in politics. That's how I was at first, but my wife said, you need to do that. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's right. A Christian man needs to be willing. I didn't think in a million years I would get picked, but God had a plan. But that's, and so who's it's attracted is the person that lusts for position. All of them, when I took them out to eat, because I want to know where they're coming from, one question would answer where they're coming from. When did you first decide you wanted to get into politics? And almost without exception, I was 12 years old, and I saw a senator give a speech, and I knew that's what I wanted to do the rest of my life. I realized they saw how people looked up to him. It wasn't like a cause or, oh, there was an injustice in my county and I'm running for that to fix it. It never was that. It was they so admired the politician, they realized, oh, I want to be in that position where everyone's looking up to me. And it was just so clear. It was kind of shocking. It was so obvious. I'm like, you're not embarrassed to answer that? I mean, like that. You could say something noble, like, oh, I'm fighting for freedom or whatever. It was so discouraging. I was in there 3 weeks and I go, oh God, why did you have me do this? It's hard to even sit here with these people because it's so fake. It's so disgusting. And he wanted me to have that, so I would have had a position the world respects. So when I made a movie, they'd go, oh, he's been a representative. It's not a big deal, and as most things aren't. Things are only a big deal when you haven't done them. But if you've done them, you're like, it's not that big a deal. So, but that's what it is, and so that's what's sad. So at the federal level, where they're able to be funded, so many things that are even legal, way more than they should be. They can get so many kickbacks and vacations and and then be promised, oh, when you're done with here, we'll give you a job for $5 million a year for the pharmaceutical companies, where it's just rotten. So then you're attracting the wicked guy that knows, but they're great people person. So when you meet them, you've probably even met ones, you kind of go, well, he seemed like a really nice guy. They know how to seem like a really nice guy. Mm-hmm. If you met Bill Clinton, I had a friend that met Bill Clinton in the White House, and he's back when he was president, and he got to go through there for something that was going on. And he said, that man was the most unbelievable person I have ever met. He had looked at who was going to be coming through the White House that day. And when I came up to him, he said, whatever his name was, he said, oh, I heard you had 6 children. That is so great. He knew how many children he had. This is the President of the United States. And he goes, oh, so glad you're pro-family. I am too, whatever. And he knew his name without a chart being given him. He goes, he was the most gifted manipulator of whatever that is. You know what I'm talking about? He was so good with people. He goes, when I'm almost done, like, oh, wow, I like him. I mean, even though he couldn't stand him, he just happened to be there at this circumstance where he got to do that. But he was like, wow, they're good at making you feel like, he said, I felt when I was talking to him, I was the only person in the world. He was so focused on me and so kind, talking about my wife and my kids and stuff. He said he was just shocked. But that's what we're up against.
Ladies and gentlemen, give a warm round of applause, gratitude to Curtis Bowers. God bless you. Go over to your table with your family. And understand that Curtis is like Bill Federer. Bill's been a longtime friend. Curtis is a committed Christian, homeschool dad, and a missionary to the United States of America. So understand that he makes his living by doing the podcast, which people find value in it and subscribe to it. That's what capitalism is. When there's a point that you're willing to part with a few of your dollars to receive this product, whatever that point is what the free market drives. And then these materials over here, I haven't read everything most likely on the table, but I can vouch for Agenda 1 and Agenda 2. I own both documentaries, and they are excellent. I recommend them highly to you. Curtis, is there anything else you want to say before we dismiss here in a moment? I invite you to visit the table and peruse some of those. I will be subscribing to the weekly news report, which I failed to realize had out there, even though I listened to the podcast, and he is a great source of information. If you have a prayer request, would you please raise a hand? The Lord knows already. You didn't even need to raise it. We're just doing that symbolically. The Lord already knows your heart. Let's continue to keep the Boyd family in our prayers as they have a newborn baby girl that had some difficulties but doing well. Dan Fisher went home today. He is sick. Actually, we're all sick of Dan Fisher. No, I mean, Dan actually is fighting a fever. So keep Dan in your prayers as he is getting ready to go on a trip to Idaho after this weekend. And then, of course, tomorrow, Dan Thayer, very serious situation. Dan Thayer has a very bad infection from his knee replacement. In fact, I saw him just before church this evening. And pray for he and Melissa. But they're going to go in tomorrow at 4:30 to try to do a debridement, and there